thank you, as we are a nonprofit foundation. We do rely on these private donations to keep the doors open. If you haven't, check out the Friends and Family Sustainability Initiative. It's a great initiative. Keep all of those services free. We're going to dive right in, talk about how we got started, our mission, vision, things like that. We're going to cover a lot of subjects in this lecture, so feel free at any point, type in your question, ask me in real time. I'll be happy to take a little pause and answer it. So how do we start? Flashback to the year 2012. I'm sure you've all probably heard of the story of Charlotte Figge, Paige Figge, Charlotte's Web, etc. Our CEO, her name's Heather Jackson. She's a maverick, running in the same circles as Charlotte, hearing about Charlotte's Web, etc. Her son Zakai, with a catastrophic and intractable form of epilepsy called DOSA syndrome, form of myoclonic epilepsy, muscle jerk seizures to be specific. He basically exhausted his Western options. As you can see, failed almost 20 pharmaceuticals, daily seizures, maybe hundreds at sometimes. He was actually in hospice or palliative care. It was at the point where Western medicine has said, there's nothing more that we can do for you except make you comfortable while you pass away. So fast forward 5 years later, he's basically seizure-free, he's pharmaceutical-free, he's developing at a much faster pace, and in reality, where we always bring it back to is he has a much better quality of life, and that's what it's about. When we use the examples of Charlotte and Zakai, those are what you might call rapid responders or miraculous stories, so to speak. It is important to remember that cannabis, hemp, CBD, THC, all these terms we want to use, it is natural, so patience is required, of course. So a little bit about us. We are the Realm of Caring Foundation, like I said. REALM is an acronym. It stands for Research, Education, Advocacy, and Improving Lives Through Measurable Results. We're a 501c3 nonprofit foundation as well. So our mission statement is we would like to empower the individual to achieve their best possible quality of life by providing and expanding our research initiatives, educational programs, and advocacy services. That's the nuts and bolts. Now, the big picture is our vision, what we see ourselves, how we see ourselves doing in 10 years, so to speak. So worldwide knowledge through science, that's where the research comes in. Acceptance through knowledge. Once people know that cannabis is a safe therapeutic option, there'll be much more acceptance socially, politically, etc. And then once there's more acceptance, there'll be more access. Laws will allow for cannabis, whereas now it's just a patchwork of different laws, especially if you want to talk about the United States. So we'll talk a little bit about our demographics just for a moment. I like to bring this up because there's been a radical paradigm shift in these last 5 years. As you can imagine, at first, a lot of pediatric epilepsy due to the stories of Charlotte, Zakai, people like that, Sanjay Gupta, Weed One on CNN, that being really pervasive in the national consciousness. But the story of medical cannabis is much more diverse and much deeper than that, excuse me. So as you can imagine, again, pediatric epilepsy at the beginning being a huge group or cohort in our population. Now it's 6 out of 10 are adults. So that's a huge shift right there. As you see, we serve about 40,000 members, about 10,000 are using cannabis, so that's 1/4. Not everybody comes to us just to use cannabis or hemp or this or that. It's for education in many forms. And so to break it down a little bit more, we talk about pediatric diagnoses. Seizure disorder is still 3 out of 4. There's a huge gap between the second one, which is cancer, about 15%. Things that are growing are neuropsychiatric or behavioral disorders, whatever you want to call them, ADHD, things like that, anxiety. Then we have autism and cerebral palsy that are also on there as well. Now for adults, it's 1 out of 3 that has a seizure disorder, still the biggest demographic. Number 2, 25%, 1 out of 4 actually has some type of pain disorder. And in the breakdown, you can also see arthritis and fibromyalgia, which are also both types of pain, one nociceptive, the other neuropathic. But the point being is pain is a growing demographic. You could put it in the context of the opioid crisis and cannabis being a viable therapeutic solution that's less harmful. Raise your hand. You might know somebody who's died from an overdose of heroin or opioids. Raise your hand if you know somebody who's died from cannabis. Nobody's raising their hands, to put it simply. So, and I think the statistic is 1 in 3 Americans, adults, lives with pain. So it's a big issue we deal with here in this country. So how do we do the things that we do? What type of services do we offer? I like to say start at our website, therock.us. That's where you can have a ton of resources at your fingertips. Printable resources, we have dosing guidelines, dosing calculators that work with certain products, printable resources such as drug interaction charts, quality guidelines and checklists. We even have online forums where you can talk to people in similar situations, get some firsthand experience. On top of this, really important, we are a research-driven organization. We have the research library. It's alphabetized, that's great. There's over 600 scholarly, already been published articles, and if you don't know what that means, it means it was written by a researcher at a university, not by Joe Schmo at the local newspaper who's writing about his opinion. So good scientific information, that's the base of everything. So we have a ton there. We'll talk about the ORR in a moment. We even have financial aid programs. As you know, cannabis, hemp-based dietary supplements, whatever term you want to use, interchangeably, sometimes different depending upon where we are. They're not covered by insurance. We hope to change that one day, but we do have financial aid programs for those who maybe necessarily couldn't afford these products but would like to try them. They could help these people. We have a lot of the same resources but geared towards physicians, doctor-to-doctor forums, even public and private accounts so that you can, A, public, maybe have some people referred to you, or B, private, learn some more yourself. We give a literature review every 3 months, etc. So we're even working on CME, continuing medical education credits for doctors and other medical professionals. In the community, we do outreach, we do school, hospital educations for nurses, etc. In the past, we've done some getting families together for legislative appearances at state or federal Congress houses, things like that. So we're always trying to expand what we do, help more people. So as I said, the R in realm stands for research. We have a few projects going, metabolite study where we're trying to inform drug testing. There are discrepancies in different leagues, NHL, NFL, soccer, Olympics, etc. Working on a current and a former player study as well. Very interesting. But our biggest project is the ORR. We have an independent review board that's approved it. This project's been going on for over a year now, so it's longitudinal. The way it works is, again, it's observational, so it's not in a clinical setting. You're not going to see doctors and having your blood drawn, etc. But it's people who are answering questionnaires quarterly on our website and who are keeping track of their progress. So the best thing about this is it's basically unique. It's in-depth. There's a wide breadth of data. It's open to anybody of any condition, of any age, whether they're using cannabis or not. So we have comparative groups. It's the largest registry of its kind in the United States and almost in the world as well, second only to one in Canada that doesn't have the depth that we do. So it was actually designed by the researchers that we work with at UPenn and Johns Hopkins University using common data elements, validated measures, etc. Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, for example. So it's a great big project, longitudinal, ongoing. It's going to help advance science. And there's an economic impact portion. So like I was saying, financial aid programs, maybe one day insurance will cover this. They'll see that they can save money. People will go to the hospital less, etc. That's one of our goals. So again, to touch on research, I always encourage everybody to do their own research. There's a lot of information out there in the public sphere that you might not have been aware of. So you see a lot of medical terms here, or therapeutic terms as to the properties of cannabis and things like that. These can all be found online. So if you want to do your research, go to our website. It's alphabetized. Addiction section, anxiety, depression, cancer sections, all scientific research that you can digest at your own pace, read about, and form your own educated opinions. So is that the end-all be-all? No, it's not. This is another great website for international research, and we talk about legislation, as far as internationally, the United States is pretty restrictive. If you're familiar with the CSA and the DEA, CSA being Controlled Substances Act, says that cannabis is Schedule 1, meaning it is a substance with no medical value, along the lines of LSD or heroin, which is a good one. So, cannabis-med.org has a lot of international research, a lot of great information that you can find there. Another one is the National Institute of Health site. This URL is not the best. Just go to pubmed.gov. So pubmed.gov, switch those. And if you type in cannabis, did that a couple months ago, you get 16,000 results. Now you get over 17,000. So in the space of a few months, there have been over 1,000 scientific articles that have come out regarding cannabis. So we're in a very exciting era where honest research into cannabis is rapidly expanding and advancing. So takeaway from that is, do your own research, form your own opinions, educate yourself. The information is out there, you just have to look for it. So we'll also talk about legislation for just a moment. As you can see, there are different colors on this map. The different colors represent different levels of legality of cannabis. For example, the minority, the gray states, which there's maybe only, 6 or 7 now, don't have any type of medical cannabis or recreational cannabis or CBD-only legislation. Caveat statements to this is Indiana has passed CBD legislation in some form, it might be very restrictive. In the example of West Virginia, who has passed medical cannabis, guess what? It's not effective until 2020. So nobody's getting medical cannabis in West Virginia until at least 2020. So also the thing to understand is there might be laws on the book and there's no apparatus or infrastructure to actually implement those laws. So we have the states in light yellow, states like Kentucky, my home state, Georgia, Iowa, Utah, CBD-only states. You live in one of these states, it's always good to look up your state laws and become state compliant as well as federally compliant. Most CBD products are regulated as hemp-based dietary supplements at this point. Then you have the light green states such as Pennsylvania, Illinois, New Mexico, Montana, a few others as well, especially in the Northeast, that have only medicinal cannabis. And again, some of these laws are more restrictive than others, very different than a state like Colorado where we have medical and recreational cannabis. And any adult over 21 can go buy cannabis for recreational purposes. And also children and adults can achieve or be recommended medical cannabis as per a doctor, or if you're a minor, 2 doctors. So as you see, laws are different in every state. Whatever state you live in, look at the laws, maybe consult a lawyer if you're very concerned about it. Always be state compliant as well. But if we do a flashback here, maybe 20 years ago, 2017, 1997, it was only California that had medical cannabis. So you see in the past 20 years, again, we've had a huge paradigm shift, a domino effect, so to speak. Access to medical cannabis is much easier now than it was 20 years ago. And here is just another slide to illustrate some of the differences in the laws. All of these states right here are states that have legalized CBD in some form or the other. Some states did or did not limit the amount of THC. So the thing to remember is that there's no blanket answer that fits every state in all the United States. I mean, if you talk about medical cannabis, it's legal in we're half of the states now in the union, but the union, the federal government still says it's illegal. So that's a gray area right there. So there's a lot of gray areas. And again, as always, I say do your own research, form your own opinion, do something, whatever it is that you are comfortable with as an individual or as a parent. Medicalmarijuana.procon.org has a good list of state laws and summary. Americans for Safe Access Now is also a group that can help with legislative questions. They're another nonprofit. Any questions on that? But remember, if you do have questions, type them in. Happy to answer. All right, so now we're going to get into some biology. Lions, tigers, and bears. What is CBD and what is THC? These are what you would term major cannabinoids. CBD standing for cannabidiol, THC standing for delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. THC is the part of the plant that gets you high. So cannabis is a plant with hundreds of compounds. It's a pharmacopoeia in itself, but there's one, THC, that gets you high, produces psychoactive effects, whether that's euphoria, paranoia, or anxiety. It depends upon your individual reaction. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't have medical or therapeutic applications. It does, but it is psychoactive. And it binds to CB1 receptors in the brain, which is why it is psychoactive. CBD, on the other hand, is different. It's another what you would call major cannabinoid, phytocannabinoid made by the plant. And when we say major, the plant makes more THC and CBD than it does of the other minor cannabinoids and other background compounds. CBD doesn't bind to receptors in the brain, or at least it's not a strong agonist at the CB1 or CB2 receptor. And it's shown to have many mechanisms of action. It's not a one-trick pony. Does multiple things in different situations. Some researchers have called CBD the Boy Scout molecule, meaning it does the right thing at the right time in the right place. so to speak. It's what naturopaths would call a regulator, a modulator, or an adaptogen. It doesn't just do one thing, it's not targeted, it can do many things possibly in the brain and in the body. And so we were talking about major cannabinoids, now we'll talk about some major and some minor cannabinoids. So you see that we have a flow chart that goes down. Everything starts with CBGA, cannabigerolic acid. And you see all the A forms are next to the raw part. So in a growing plant, a raw plant, you will find acidic forms. As you dry out the plant, add heat, light, and air, decarboxylation happens, and you get the active forms. So whereas THCA is found in the raw plant, and THCA does not get you high, decarboxylate it into delta-9 THC, and it will get you high, or become active, so to speak. Take one more step, oxidation turns THC into CBN and delta-8 THC. That's just another further step in the chemical process. So you see under these compounds, these major THC and CBD cannabinoids and other minor cannabinoids, CBN, cannabinol, THCV, tetrahydrocannabivarin, CBC, cannabicyclol, etc., and especially CBL, not known. So these are compounds that aren't found to such an extent in the plant that they're easy to extract and isolate. So we still have more research to do on them, whereas CBD and THC, easy to take it out, easy to see what it does. We've been researching and isolating these compounds for well over 50 years, especially in Israel. So the point to draw here is that these are compounds that work together as a team, and specific compounds we're learning have specific applications. It's very interesting. And we've touched on the major and minor cannabinoids. Now let's touch on terpenes, and you can also use the term flavonoids in some cases. These are compounds that give the flavor and the smell to a specific cannabis strain. These compounds are also found in other plants. So pinene, found in pine needles or coniferous trees. Linalool, found in lavender. Beta-caryophyllene, found in black pepper. Beta-caryophyllene is always a great one to mention because it acts as an agonist directly on the CB2 receptor in the body. Myrcene, also found in hops. And if you weren't aware, hops used to flavor beer. Hops and cannabis are closely related. In fact, if you talk about archaeobotany, which is the study of pollinating plants in the past, a lot of researchers won't even draw a distinction between cannabis, ancient cannabis, and ancient hop pollen because you basically can't distinguish the two. They're that closely related, very closely, so to speak. So there's also limonene found in citrus fruit, and you see the purported properties listed on these. It's important to note that the science really hasn't gone far enough to say you have X or Y diagnosis, you need this or that strain of cannabis. That's overstepping the bounds of science. Every individual is different. You could have two individuals given the same dose of the same strain and have two different reactions. So hopefully with epigenetic research, genetic testing of both plants and people, we'll get to the point of individualized medicine where we would be able to match somebody with a specific strain profile or something like that. Are we there today? I don't think so. So there's a bit of trial and error involved. And with that saying, I usually view it as a spectrum. You can start at the high CBD, low THC side. Not going to get you high. Great, has a lot of therapeutic potential. Does it work for everybody? No. Does it work for a lot of people? Yes. And then if it doesn't, you can always add more THC down the road, try other strains, etc. So sometimes this can be a journey. But terpenes are very interesting, and there's a lot of research going into terpenes currently. So what am I getting at? What am I trying to explain? There's actually a scientific term for this. It's called the synergistic or the entourage effect. So cannabis, again, a plant, Cannabis sativa L, one species, over 100 cannabinoids. CBD and THC are just 2 out of hundreds. And then you might have roughly 200 terpenes or flavonoids that are possibly present depending upon the strain at different levels. Some are not present in other strains, etc. And so I'm going to read this verbatim. I usually don't do this, but this is an article from Ethan Russo, one of the premier cannabis researchers. And this came out in 2011. It's now 2017. So phytocannabinoid and terpenoid content offer complementary pharmacological activities that may strengthen and broaden clinical applications and improve the therapeutic index of cannabis extracts containing THC or other base phytocannabinoids, i.e. CBD. Psychopharmacological and dermatological applications show the greatest promise. That's a very powerful statement right there. And to summarize it, this plant has hundreds of compounds. They work together like a symphony. If you take out the woodwind or the brass or the percussion section, that music's not going to be as beautiful. Same thing, if you take out half of these compounds, or if you take them all out and you just use the CBD, it's probably not going to be as therapeutic. Nature made this compound cocktail of natural compounds that work together. Why? How? I don't know, but it's pretty amazing in itself. So we've touched on plant biology. Let's touch on human biology and the endocannabinoid system. What's the endocannabinoid system? It's not a really big term, especially in the medical spheres. It's pretty new discovery as far as medical discoveries go. In the early 90s, again, in Israel, which is the premier or vanguard nation in cannabis research. They were the first ones to isolate CBD and THC, etc. First ones to really study cannabis in a rigorous and honest manner, starting with Raphael Mechoulam. So it's called the endocannabinoid system because they actually use these isolated plant compounds to identify receptors in your body that they bound to, thus discovering this system and naming it after the plant that they use to discover it. So when we're talking about the entourage effect in the plant, it seems like we almost have an entourage effect in the body, meaning we have several compounds, ligands, many receptors that work together. It's a complex signaling system. I like to call the endocannabinoid system the master regulatory system. A couple reasons. You have receptors all throughout your brain and your body. These receptors are found basically throughout all your tissue to some extent or the other. CB1 found mostly in the CNS, your central nervous system, your brain. CB2 found in liver, bone, reproductive organs, heart, lymphatic tissue, especially your autoimmune system, your GI tract. So these receptors that cannabis acts on and that you have your own endogenous system and chemicals to act on, i.e. anandamide, 2-AG, NADA, interarachidonyl dopamine, 2-arachidonyl glycerol ether, noliden ether, etc. They're finding more every day. And CB1 and CB2 are not the only receptors as well. There's the G-coupled protein 55, an orphan receptor. So again, the point to draw is this is a ubiquitous system throughout the body. It interlinks with all of your body's other systems to promote or to balance homeostasis, which is a very, you could call it a medical term for balance in the body, for health, etc. So it's a system that we're really starting to discover, we're really starting to get the nuts and bolts of, but it's a very important system. And we might stumble upon a quote that illustrates that as well. But we're going to talk about the brain first. Notice I mentioned the opioid epidemic, which we are facing in this country for whatever reason. So here's a great comparison. This is a brain scan where it's lit up. That's where you have cannabinoid receptors, mainly CB1, because remember we said CB2 are found more in the body. They are found in the brain, but not to a great extent, or not as great of an extent as the CB1. But anyway, what part is black? Your brainstem, meaning you don't really have a lot of receptors there. So why is this important? What does your brainstem do? Your brainstem is closely linked with your autonomic nervous system functions. Autonomic, things you don't control consciously, i.e. heart rate, respiration rate. Respiration rate, very important. You want to breathe, right? You have to live. You do have opioid receptors on your brainstem, which is why if you take too much heroin, you take too much fentanyl, too much oxycodone, too much Vicodin, hydrocodone, you take too much, you can stop breathing and die. Cannabis, this doesn't happen because you don't have receptors where your breathing is controlled. That's important to know. Now, am I saying that opioids are bad? No, I think they're great, strong pain medications, useful in many situations, but they can potentially be fatal. That's just the truth of the situation. But what, on the other hand, is an area that is lit up. Let's talk about right here, the hippocampus. The hippocampus is part of your brain that's closely involved in memory, retention of memories, deletion of traumatic memories. So when we're talking about our veterans or just people with PTSD who are using cannabis successfully, and just if you didn't know, post-traumatic stress disorder was just added to Colorado's list of qualifying conditions as a reason that one can receive medical cannabis. So there's quite a bit of science in this area. We even have a PTSD section in our research library. But you have cannabis, endocannabinoid receptors in your hippocampus, closely linked with memory. To put it simply, maybe that's why a lot of people with PTSD are finding success with cannabis. This is the neuron death triad. There's a couple examples to use with this one. Really, it's happening in everybody. I'm aging, you're aging, we're all aging. That's the neuron death triad at its slowest. It can also happen with a broken bone or a bruise, and in extreme cases, anxiety in the brain or a seizure in the brain. So basically you have reactive oxidative stress, which can have several causes, excitotoxicity, more electrical activity because of this stress, and then neuronal inflammation. So at these three steps, cannabis, through its properties that have been researched, can cut down on this process. So check out these sections, in our research library, antioxidant, neuroprotective / neurogenerative section. There's also that when we're talking about excitotoxicity, too much electrical activity, cannabis can reduce the firing of ion channels, TRP channels, TRPV, vanilloid, and TRPA, calcium ion, sodium, potassium channels, muscle function and movement, how fast those electrical impulses are going, can kind of hit the brakes on that. Modulation of CB1 receptors as well. And glutamate. Glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter, and excess of glutamate in the synapse can cause increased electrical activity, and again, inflammation, stress, it all links back. You can also check out the anti-inflammation section in our research library. And for secondary inflammation, not in the neurological system, CBD itself can modulate CB2 receptors and reduce inflammation, cytokines, things like that. So this is a good one, and it can be in many contexts, whether less or more severe or drastic. And this is CBD cannabidiol. Remember specifically, we talked about how it has many mechanisms of action. The first thing that the endocannabinoid system does that a lot of other systems in the body don't do is it enables retrograde signaling. So a nerve impulse fires one way, and it goes down to the axon terminal, where it sends an electrical message that turns into a chemical signaling message, i.e. release glutamate or release GABA, which is gamma-aminobutyric acid, and is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. The way that the ECS works is backwards, and it would say, hey, too much glutamate, put some back in the synapse, etc., to put it in very vague or very simple terms. So some of the things that CBD, cannabidiol, does: modulation on the CB1 receptor in the brain, modulation of the CB2 receptor in the body. 5-HT1A refers to your serotonergic system. Serotonin, SSRIs act on the 5-HT1A. So that's why cannabis has reported antidepressant and anxiolytic properties as well. Opioid receptors sometimes are closely linked with cannabinoid receptors, and there is some interplay between cannabis and the opioid receptors. Coupled with the TRP channel is another reason why there's evidence. We have the TRPV down by the ions. Another reason why cannabis has been seen as a successful therapy for neuropathic and nociceptive pain, i.e. arthritis or fibromyalgia. CBD regulates GABA, remember gamma-aminobutyric acid. If you're familiar with the benzodiazepine class of drugs, Xanax, alprazolam, clonazepam, Klonopin, those act on GABA. CBD reduces glutamate, possibly, and the ion channels, which again has to do with electrical signaling, muscle firing, and myoclonic epilepsy. It can reduce the rate at which electrical signals travel if they are traveling too fast, like this to give a visual. And remember that the endocannabinoid system always works with your endogenous systems. It can enhance adenosine, which is an endogenous and anti-inflammatory. But this isn't the whole picture. This acts with other receptors, other chemical and electrical signaling systems in the body. This is a very complex regulatory system that works with everything else that, again, like I said, we're really just figuring out the nuts and bolts now, and there's going to be a lot of research coming out in the coming months and years that will elucidate even more. It's one of the vanguard fields in medicine today. And as well, on a side note, CBD can increase blood flow. It's a vasodilator or relaxant. So, as I was saying, we're going to get to a great quote that illustrates the therapeutic potential of cannabis. And I'm going to read this one verbatim just because it is so powerful. written by Packer, Bakai, and Kunos in 2006. They came out with a revised version in 2011. I think these are some guys who work for the National Institute of Health. So again, our own government in the United States, which the other branch, the DEA, says cannabis is Schedule 1 and has no medical value. But you got these guys coming out and saying this. In the past decade, the endocannabinoid system has been implicated in a growing number of physiological functions, both in the central and peripheral nervous system and peripheral organs. More importantly, modulating the activity of the endocannabinoid system turned out to hold therapeutic promise in a wide range of disparate diseases and pathological conditions, ranging from mood and anxiety disorders, movement disorders such as Parkinson's and Huntington's diseases, neuropathic pain, multiple sclerosis, spinal cord injury, cancer, atherosclerosis, which is like hardening of the arteries, myocardial infarction, which is a fancy way of saying heart attack, stroke, hypertension, glaucoma, obesity, metabolic syndrome, might be able to put diabetes under that, and osteoporosis, just to name a few. So we basically went through a laundry list of conditions that the endocannabinoid system is implicated in. So, am I saying that cannabis cures everything? Definitely not. What I am saying is that cannabis, a plant, acts on a system that you have in your body that basically is involved in all disease states in some way or the other. So how do we tap into this potential is the question. And here we have a chart of drugs. Now, if you have a child who's on epilepsy, this might look pretty familiar. Drugs like lamictal, lamotrigine, caprolivitiracetam, Depakote, valproic acid, or sodium valproate, etc. FDA chart. Certain drugs approved for certain age groups and certain types of epilepsy. One thing you don't see on here are the benzos, things like rectal diastat or clobazam, aka Onfi. So those drugs aren't approved for these age groups by the FDA. So it's an off-label prescription. So every day, doctors prescribe medications that aren't FDA approved for that reason. Am I saying your doctor's doing something wrong? No. Off-label prescriptions are fine. But in the same respect, cannabis isn't FDA approved. So do the math yourself, so to speak. And again, with the AEDs, this is a drug interaction chart. Before I explain it, the thing I like to say is most drugs are processed in your liver. Most exogenous substances are processed in your liver, whether it's nicotine, caffeine, alcohol, pharmaceutical drugs, aspirin, Tylenol. And so with that being said, cannabis is processed in your liver as well, especially if taken orally. So rule number one, don't take it at the same time as medications, 2 to 4 hours away. Give your liver one job at a time to help avoid interactions or avoid a traffic jam in your liver, so to speak. It's usually that simple. So with this chart, red line is the baseline where this drug would be at normally without an interaction. The green bar is the potential interaction. For some, like clonazepam, the interaction potential is to decrease the level in the blood. For others, such as levetiracetam, Keppra, the interaction potential is to increase the level of Keppra or levetiracetam in the blood. For others, like Onfi, can go above or below, so an interaction could decrease or increase the level of Onfi in the blood. The black line is the average, so for Onfi or clobazam, usually just a little bit of an increase. Now for lamotrigine, usually a pretty big decrease. So again, it's important to know that just about anything can interact. Drugs can interact with other drugs. So space things out, talk to your pharmacist, talk to your doctor before you start cannabis therapy, especially if you're taking medications. Okay, so quality. Quality is a great question. As you see, it says a fact, cannabis is very safe, but if you don't have consistency, proper labeling, lack of contaminants, then it's not going to be safe. So the way I like to say it is, well, if you're getting your cannabis or your hemp from China, who knows what they do with it there? Maybe they grow it on land with heavy metals, arsenic, lead. Maybe they grow it on radioactive soil. And if you didn't know, hemp was used after the Chernobyl accident in the Ukraine to actually clean up some of that radioactivity. Hemp or cannabis is what's called a bioremediator. It can pull toxins out of the soil. So the products we support, I'm not going to go into them. You can look at it on our site. They do self-regulate. American Herbal Products Association, it's nationally syndicated. Follow those guidelines, follow current good manufacturing practices, etc. And they use independent laboratories to test every batch of their products for active ingredients and contaminants. Does everybody do this? No. In fact, in the past, you can see these FDA letters. The FDA has actually sent out cease and desist letters to companies because A, their companies didn't have any active ingredient, so olive oil, selling it as CBD or cannabis oil, or those companies had contaminants such as lead or heavy metals. So not all products are created equal. The hemp and the cannabis industries, in some cases and in some states, aren't as regulated as they should be. I would still caution for over-regulation, but we could definitely use some more regulation. I think that's coming soon. But either way, you have to be an advocate for yourself as a consumer. And you can go to our site, therock.us, log in. If you haven't logged in, register please, and go under Client Resources and access the Quality of Product Matters Guide. It's a checklist of questions you can ask to find a high-quality product. It's a great resource. So we started talking about drugs and interactions. Let's go into a little bit more detail. So we got this off a research article, the first quote, up to 1.5 grams, 1,500 milligrams of CBD is reportedly well tolerated in humans. And furthermore, cannabis is basically non-toxic. So to discuss the LD50 rating first, that means lethal dose 50. It's the ratio of a therapeutic to a lethal dose where half of the population will actually die. They do this in rats, not in people, because obviously that would be unethical. But for aspirin, it's 1 in 20. So 2 aspirin takes your headache away. 40 aspirin will kill half the people who take 40 aspirin. Cannabis, let's use a very easy to imagine example. So 1 joint gets you high, just for a silly example. 20,000 or 40,000 joints will kill you. And if you know anybody who can smoke that much, then yeah, it's not practical, to put it like that. And I think the statistic we got off the DEA ruling was that is probably equivalent to 1,500 pounds of NIDA cannabis in 15 or so minutes. So again, it's practically impossible to take too much cannabis to damage your organs or kill yourself. Now, with that being said, if you take too much THC, yes, you can have a negative psychological reaction, i.e. anxiety, paranoia, things like this. But just to draw the point that it's not going to kill you. So, that being said, drug interactions are really important. Like I was saying earlier, most exogenous substances, and by exogenous I mean substances that don't come naturally from the body. It could be a herbal supplement, it could be cannabis, it could be a pharmaceutical drug. They're metabolized to at least to some extent in the liver, usually by the cytochrome P450 enzyme pathway and those subpathways therein. 2C9, 219, etc., 3A4. So 2 simple rules. Don't take cannabis and meds at the same time. A 2 to 4 hour window will help avoid interactions, giving your liver one job at a time. And monitor for negative side effects and be aware of a medication's side effects in the first place. And for a lot of pharmaceuticals, you can actually get blood serum levels drawn. They measure the level of a drug in the blood. You do that beforehand. And periodically afterward, after starting cannabis or hemp-based therapy, you can have a scientific measurement of if there is a change or not. So good things to do your due diligence. You also see there's the quote, there's no documented deaths from cannabis overdose, but every 20 minutes there's a pharma death in the US. Pharmaceuticals bad? Definitely not. They're great. Advancement of Western and modern medicine. Maybe we just need a little bit more education about how to use them properly. So we've been talking about safety here, and I don't like to get misconstrued, so don't take this as me saying everybody and anybody should use cannabis. It's okay for everybody. That is not what I'm saying. But with that being said, another research article, it's not accurate that cannabis has no medical value or that information on safety is lacking. We have plenty of information. So for some cases, should it be a first-line treatment? I don't know, maybe, maybe not. But some special considerations, pregnancy and nursing. If you're a mother or you are going to deliver, these things will transfer through the placenta or through the breast milk into your baby's system. Do we have extensive research on this? We don't have a lot of longitudinal research. There is a pregnancy section in our research library. I suggest you check out the Jamaican study if you want to answer to this question, but legally I cannot say okay, you are pregnant or you are nursing, it is safe to use cannabis. That is not a statement I'm making. Adolescents with developing brains, this definitely refers to cannabis with a high THC content, psychoactive recreational cannabis. But again, a special consideration where cannabis might not be a first-line treatment or really an option. But with that being said, Adderall, which is basically amphetamine salts, is given to children from a young age. Is that worse? I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But it is FDA approved. And psychiatric illnesses, schizophrenia, things like that. If you have a genetic predisposition or a family history of psychiatric illnesses or breaks, again, especially with the high THC cannabis or really any cannabis in general, a special consideration where you say, hey, this might not be an option for me therapeutically. So, administration. You saw the example I gave earlier with the LD50 of smoking a joint. That's where I want you to throw that example out into the garbage. That's a 20th century thing. It's a misnomer. When we're talking about medical cannabis and true medical cannabis, smoking is the worst way that you could ever imbibe cannabis. Here's why. Take you back to 7th grade chemistry. The difference between a physical and a chemical change. A chemical change, burning, pyrolysis, combustion. Doesn't matter what you burn. You can burn a cigarette, you can burn cannabis, tire, you can burn, a fire in your fireplace. Burning creates carcinogens. There's no way around it. Read some research. Again, cannabis has a few hundred compounds in it, 400 or 500. You burn it, you pop it up to 2,000, some of which are necessarily going to be carcinogenic. So we're in the 21st century. Instead of smoking cannabis, you can vaporize it. That's a physical change, changing a solid or a liquid to a gaseous state so that it can be inhaled without changing or denaturing the chemical structure. Vaporization is both a rapid relief, acute method of administration, lungs, bloodstream, body, brain, etc. So acute, it creates a high blood peak and then it lowers. So it can be good for immediate relief, not maybe necessarily the best administration method for long-term relief. Might have to dose multiple times a day, but it could be good in the case of, say, flare-up pain, breakthrough pain, an anxiety attack when you need relief right then, etc. It's systemic. It goes throughout the whole body. Topical is the opposite. It's what's called a localized administration method. So I have a rash on my elbow, or I have eczema on my knees, or pain in my knuckles. That's when you might try a topical. Transdermals. They're even making cannabis patches now that have extended transdermal release and delivery systems for 8 to 12 hours, i.e. like Mary's. These are discrete. They're efficiently dosed through the skin. And when we're talking about these things, transdermal, topical, vapor, even the rectal, basically everything but G-tube, J-tube, capsules, and sublingual, you're avoiding the first pass metabolism of the liver. So transdermal is, again, systemic, all-day relief, a discrete way to dose as well. Rectal administration is also highly efficient. You have the rectal cavity, which is lined with capillaries, veins, and blood vessels. So whether it's a liquid or a suppository, it should be rapidly absorbed and efficiently, a high bioavailability. Not everybody's comfortable with that. That's okay. Rectal administration is not for everybody, but it is an option and will be a more accessible option in the future. Now, if your kid doesn't take food or drink by mouth, there, of course, is the option of the G-tube, the J-tube, or the Mickey button. You can take a liquid product and put it right through there. I would mix it with the feeding solution or anything else that has fat in it, i.e. milk. When we talk about the active ingredients in cannabis, they are what you would call lipid soluble. They dissolve in fats, both in the adipose, the fat tissue of our body, and in edible fats like olive oil or coconut oil or brownies or chocolate, etc. That's why you find so many edibles, and I don't think edibles are a medical way to dose. When was the last time your doctor said eat a quarter of a brownie, right? So anyway, G-tube, J-tube, another systemic delivery method. Capsules are also systemic, but it has to go through the GI tract, just like the tube. Stomach acid, liver enzyme should denature some, so lower bioavailability than rectal, sublingual, transdermal, or vaporization. Sublingual is great. Just like capsules, it's a consistent administration schedule, 2 to 3 times daily. Because of the concentration of these products, you can deliver more to the system than you could with a vapor or a transdermal or a topical, especially if needed. It allows you to practically increase the dose. Sublingual is preferred by a lot of our clients. Under the tongue, buccally in the cheeks, 30 seconds to a minute, swallow the rest. Great systemic delivery system. So dosing. We have dosing guidelines and calculators on our website, so I'm not going to go into it too much. The way I like to say it, I use a very simple analogy. This can go in almost any situation. Slow and steady wins the race, just like the tortoise and the hare. There's not a target dose for any condition. You know, it's not as simple as, oh, well, you have epilepsy, take this much, or you have arthritis, take this much. Every person is different, so the idea is to start on a low dose and to increase slowly until you see the best results. And again, because these things build up and are stored in the fat cells, we usually say give it a month. So if that dose after a few weeks isn't working, increase it, follow a steady pattern. Increase by adding the starting dose each time. So because of half-life, you do want to dose multiple times a day. If you're dosing once a day, it might not build up in the system. And again, like I've already mentioned, always 2 to 4 hours from pharmaceuticals. Talk to your doctor and pharmacist about interactions. If they don't know about interactions, print off our chart, print off some research articles so that you can educate them. You know, the resources are out there. Monitor for changes in progress. Do the blood serum levels, and especially for benzos, do desmethyl and nor levels. Desmethylclobazam, norclobazam, they're active metabolites. Yeah, so dosing is pretty easy. Scientists or doctors might sometimes call it finding your subjective therapeutic dose. So cannabis and CBD especially also exhibits what's called a bell curve or a biphasic effect, meaning another analogy for you, Goldilocks. Too hot, too cold, just right. You give too much, you can exacerbate issues, more anxiety, more pain, more seizures. Give the right amount within the therapeutic window and you'll see therapeutic results. You don't give enough and you're not going to see a lot of change. So another reason why slow and steady. And then with anybody with an extensive negative bacterial infection, i.e. Lyme disease or PANS or PANDAS, if you don't know what that is, it's a subset in autism. Pediatric autoimmune neuropsychological disorders due to a streptococcal infection. Cannabis has antibacterial properties. Herxheimer reaction is when you have a bacterial infection, you take an antibiotic or anything else that kills bacteria. It kills the bad bacteria. As they die, they release toxins, and that produces negative symptoms. It might be flu-like symptoms, inflammation, pain. It might be worse behavior in somebody with autism. But it's possible and it's something to watch out for, and it's why some people have thought, hey, this isn't working for me, it's making me feel worse. Well, really, you're just having Herxheimer reaction, and you weren't educated on what that was. So it's important, and not a lot of people are educated on the potential. So, reasonable expectations. As I said, this is natural. It can take time. You might have to titrate up or titrate down. You might have to find the dose that works for you. We usually say give it a trial period of 6 months. It's not always going to work overnight. So be patient. As well, what does success mean to you? There are different versions of success. You know, mood, cognition, sleep, quality of life. Do I have my child out of the bed for one night a week? You know, am I able to get outside of the house and actually do some yard work? So think about what that means to you. There's a lot of different definitions. Have reasonable expectations. And on the journey, measure your progress. Use an app. Use our research registry. Take notes yourself. Take down your pain level every day. Record how many seizures your child is having, etc. You don't want to go fast forward 6 months down the road and say, I don't know if I'm seeing results or not. Always measure that progress through even apps on the phone you can use. I always do the half-life. It's really simple. It's either 5, it takes 5 half-lives to eliminate a substance from the body. Whatever substance it is has a different level of half-life or length. So if you're dosing a few times a day, you're basically covering this half-life and increasing it very slowly. As well, with cannabis being stored in the fat cells, even with hemp-based dietary supplements or CBD products, you can test positive for THC. The longer you take it, the more consistently you take it, the more likely it is. So what I say to people who have a commercial's driver's license, who are police, or nurses, they get opioids and they're drug tested, understand that you can test positive for THC and you may be risking your career. So an important thing to know. You want to do some more reading yourself. Bonnie Goldstein, Cannabis Revealed, that's a good book. Cannabis Health Index by Hugh Bleshing. He alphabetizes it by condition, rates the studies that have been done with a 5-star system as to how likely it is that cannabis can help with these things. I found that pretty good. I like it. Cannabis Evolution and Ethnobotany, that's a college level text that they're going to be using one day. Unless you're really interested in the story of how cannabis evolved, as far as 10, 20, 30, 40,000 years ago, and its relationship with people since then. There's not a lot of practical information there. But John Hicks, Medicinal Power of Cannabis, that's a good one that's written in layperson language. Easy to digest, helpful, quick. Or in Davinsky, for patients who've had little success in treating their seizures with other meds, CBD could be a last resort. Paradigm is shifting, now it's more of a first or second resort. We met this guy at the Harvard conference, CanMed 2017. Look that up if you want, CANNMED 2017. It was a great conference. A lot of researchers from Israel, this nation, other nations as well, even as far as Brazil. Great conference. This could be a new therapy for any intractable condition. And obviously, like I'm trying to point out, the paradigm is shifting and more people are looking towards cannabis as a viable therapeutic option in its many forms. So check us out. Become a friend or family member. Love to have you. Love to help you. Do you want to go over the website? You guys want to go over the website? We're going to go over the website. Like I said, we have a ton of resources. If you want to contact us, give us a call at info@therock.us or give us an email at 719-347-5400. Just get a hold of us. We're happy to help. And we're going to go over the website real quick. Research library, like I was saying, it's alphabetized. We have a lot of sections: ALS, epilepsy, fibromyalgia, Parkinson's, pancreatitis, pain. See how extensive pain is? Look how many studies we have. Wow. Can't even count them. Just because they're not numbered. I could count them, but there's dots. So it was a little bit hard to count that fast. And it's the login information's not in there, so if you want to look at any of the other resources, log in and give us a call. I forgot my login information, I'm sorry. So thanks guys for joining us. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Email us, send us a comment, tell us how you liked it, yes or no, anything we can improve on. We're always trying to do better. Any practitioners out there, here in February we'll be doing another literature review. I'll go over some of the new literature that's coming out. So email us, info@therock.us, call us, 719-347-5400. Happy to help, and happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for joining in.